Police lights splashed across my grandfather's Texas ranch as a woman screeched, "He's trespassing, arrest him now, this instant officer." I had just driven 12 hours home, stepped from my truck, and met Willowbrook's reigning HOA president, Margaret Williams herself. She smirked while two officers approached, flashlights up, asking for identification like I was a stranger prowling someone else's porch. "I'm Nathan Hayes," I said, showing the deed on my phone. "Hayes Ranch, family owned since 1947, sir." Officer Rodriguez studied the documents, nodded, and holstered his skepticism while Margaret's smile froze like cheap wax under cold moonlight. "Ma'am, this land is outside HOA jurisdiction," he said, returning my property rights and her power trip to their corners. Margaret stepped closer, perfume sharp, voice sharper, suggesting boundary discrepancies and hinting I was standing on community common area instead. When the cruisers rolled away, she dropped the polite mask and whispered the grudge that had curdled for decades here. 20 years ago your father ruined our resort plan," she hissed, "and my family lost everything, including my father's will. You have 72 hours to leave or discover how comprehensive our regulations can be when properly motivated by fear." I watched her heels tick away like a countdown and finally admitted the truth my grandfather's last letter warned about. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a small-town war, personal, generational, and nastier than anything back in Washington bureaucracy. Unfortunately for Margaret, my day job is ending HOA tyrannies. My office wall holds photos of presidents I imprisoned personally. I oversee every HOA in America, with authority that scares bullies who mistake homeowners for helpless targets, not me anymore. I texted a note to myself, "Day 1, Margaret Williams just declared war," then unlocked the farmhouse door and sighed. Exhaustion begged for sleep, but strategy settled in, cold and focused, because bullies only respect consequence and documentation and sunlight. I would give her both, preferably on camera, preferably by her own rules, the ones she weaponized against herself publicly. I powered up security systems, charged batteries, and set alerts, then stood outside breathing mesquite and remembering my father's steadfast. 72 hours sounded generous, but predators never plan for prey that knows the hunter's habits better than they do. I shut the door, smiled without humor, and welcomed the Willowbrook War, because I already knew how it ended badly. Dawn found my porch buried under orange notices, 47 violations taped everywhere like confetti thrown by bureaucratic gremlins overnight. Grass height exceeded tolerance by half an inch, mailbox color offended the sacred palate, even my coffee mug violated guidelines. Each citation glittered with Margaret's signature, timestamps hopping through the night, proof she patrolled in darkness with tape measure righteousness. One envelope differed, personal stationery, a note announcing 70 hours left and buyers waiting, signed M. Weber with venomous flourish. The postscript named Judge Harrison, a familiar ghost from case files, slippery enough to avoid charges yet always near corruption. As dread tightened, Linda Thompson waved from the fence, pressing a folder into my hands like contraband smuggled through siege. 2 years of documentation spilled out, photos, spreadsheets, patterns of fines, vandalism, missing pets, and targeted misery against dissenters systematically. While I reviewed, a new text arrived, unknown numbers threaten nosy neighbors, 46 hours left, consider this your reminder. I walked to the mailbox with a measuring tape, public, very deliberate, and waited for the hum of her cart. Margaret arrived in uniform zeal, visor gleaming, smile precise, reminding me approvals required 6 weeks and non-compliance carried consequences immediately. I confirmed my mailbox met regulations, noted her nocturnal timestamps, and asked how she measured grass at 2 a.m. She leaned close, voice honeyed and hateful, whispering about weak hearts, my father's stress, and inevitabilities that favored her always. The cruelty landed like a punch, reopening grief I never examined, and lighting the fuse I keep for tyrants specifically. I told her to back off, cancel the lies, coexist peaceably, or meet the part of me Washington calls closer. She laughed, named Judge Harrison, promised Texas justice, and sped away, certain I would fold like everyone before her throne. Instead, I made calls, documented everything, hardened my timeline, and set traps built from their bylaws and hubris and precedent. Night returned with coyotes singing and cameras watching, silent witnesses pointed at fences, gates, and the beloved rose garden carefully. Somewhere beyond the mesquite, wheels whispered, plans advanced, and lines they thought invisible glowed red on my screens all night. I poured black coffee, wrote a checklist, and promised my father I would end what he started long ago here. By sunrise, I was ready. Whatever Margaret broke next would become evidence, leverage, and eventually the rope tightening around her. Morning broke under the smell of chemicals and grief. My grandmother's heritage roses lay blackened while a deputy photographed devastation. He offered insurance forms and helpless platitudes, but I already had something better than sympathy, unblinking cameras feeding a cloud. At 3:17, Robert Williams crept across garden with a sprayer while Margaret's voice crackled, just the old roses, Robert. Where the shoes I left, 2 sizes big, she added, rehearsed malice designed to blur tracks and accountability for investigators. I made backups, breathed through fury, and called Elena Martinez, the lawyer who had hauled tyrants off pedestals beside me. Be careful, she warned, small-town politics sharpen knives, send everything, and do not trust the sheriff to protect you. Then Dorothy Kim arrived with a casserole and stubborn kindness, offering greenhouse cuttings from those Irish beauties we both loved. Over tea, she mapped the scheme, Margaret harassed, Harrison's shells bought cheap, resorts flipped millions, and your springs tempted everyone. Would you testify? I asked, her eyes hardened, and she said, at my age, fear is wasted breath on bullies. I rewound the footage further, catching midnight trespasses, measuring fence posts, angles catalogued, and a suited stranger studying boundary markers. Then came the recording that changed everything, Wind carrying Margaret to my microphones while she bragged to Judge Harrison smugly. Psychological pressure works, she purred. He promised injunctions, creative code interpretations, and condemnation using septic fears and grandfather clauses conveniently. Another text hit, 24 hours left, Nathan, your father loved his cemetery plot, so peaceful, such an efficient resolution. Decision made, I emailed my director, pull everything on Harrison and Willowbrook, and loop in public corruption at the Bureau. Vacation ended, investigation began. I opened folders, labeled evidence, and built a timeline brutal enough to survive federal scrutiny easily. By evening, clouds piled purple, Dorothy's words steadied me, and vengeance cooled into something sharper, justice with receipts and witnesses. I printed transcripts, cached passwords, and staged hard copies because cornered predators always swing wildly before cages close on them. Outside, coyotes faded and the ranch breathed, but my screens glowed, counting down, promising a reckoning by sunrise for someone. Margaret believed rules were whips. She would learn rules can be boomerangs, especially when written by someone like me professionally. The remaining hours would decide whether this ended at my fence line or inside a federal courthouse under lights unforgiving. 72 hours after her ultimatum, Margaret convened an emergency meeting packed with neighbors, board loyalists, and Judge Harrison present. She paraded photoshopped hazards, recited 200 violations, and invoked children's safety like a shield for greed and control theatrics. I walked the aisle slowly, produced a folder, and asked whether she preferred we discuss the poisoned roses first tonight. The room cracked with whispers. Margaret demanded order. I cited her bylaws allowing any owner to speak at emergency sessions. Harrison rose, booming authority, suggesting I sit down before making things worse. I asked about his financial interest instead here. Then the audio played, crisp and damning, Margaret and Harrison plotting injunctions, joking about weak hearts, and timing my collapse. Chaos erupted. Dorothy stood, finally fearless, naming families destroyed and land flipped while neighbors found their courage to confront lies. Margaret slammed the gavel and unveiled her masterstroke, a notarized lien claiming my father borrowed $50,000 from reserves illegally. Debt plus penalties equals $300,000, she crowed, payable by the heir, and faces around us hardened against me. I studied the document, fought the gut punch, and smiled as a tiny flaw surfaced like a lifeline midstream there. My father was in Afghanistan then, I said, and that notary was not licensed until 2005 at all. Elena entered with agents, explaining paper stock whitening agents post-dated the signature, and the seal belonged to a future year. The FBI moved, Margaret's confidence crumpled, Harrison's eyes measured exits, neighbors filmed despite signs forbidding documentation inside the community center. As handcuffs clicked, Margaret hissed at me, "Check your mail tomorrow, my resignation isn't the only thing I filed today." Even arrested, she played games. I logged the threat, saved everything twice, and braced for Harrison's counterpunch by dawn tomorrow. It arrived before sleep, bank accounts frozen, cease and desist nailed to my door, and lawsuits multiplying like weeds overnight. Elena called, emergency injunction scheduled, health hazards alleged, change of venue required, federal jurisdiction invoked, time suddenly razor thin everywhere. I converted crypto, paid retainers, and rang Marcus Chen, forensic accountant, to dissect Willowbrook's books with merciless precision for me. Then I walked into the courthouse archives, citing the Public Information Act until reluctant clerks produced foreclosure files on demand. Patterns emerged like bruises, 23 homes seized, shell companies purchasing, and a picture forming uglier than any photoshopped slideshow. In the parking lot, Robert Williams sat wrecked by consequences and marriage, then handed me a flash drive of secrets. Years of recordings spilled Margaret's boasts, Harrison's orders, and something worse, digitalis slipped into my father's coffee at community meetings. I steadied myself, promised justice, secured his cooperation, and forwarded copies to Elena while Marcus messaged jackpot with receipts attached. Ghost vendors, fake cleaning contracts, and $800,000 diverted to a corporation owned by Harrison's wife, Marcus reported grimly. That night Harrison called, voice varnished thin, asking what I wanted. I answered, prison and restitution for every family hurt. Morning brought cameras, agents, and the federal courthouse, Judge Patricia Reeves presiding, incorruptible and allergic to judicial theatrics and hypocrisy. Elena laid out embezzlement trails, foreclosure patterns, and shell companies, then played Robert's late-night confessions for the gallery listening. The poison plan chilled the room. I kept still, knuckles white beneath the table, rage bridled by purpose and evidence. On the stand, I revealed my role, executive director overseeing national HOA enforcement, with 200 convictions behind me already. The defense probed vendetta, but timelines, recordings, and forensics anchored every claim long before I ever intervened in this town. Harrison arrived in cuffs by lunchtime, arrested on corruption charges. Margaret finally cracked, spitting a confession straight at me publicly. Judge Reeves vacated every lien and violation from Margaret's reign and ordered seized homes returned with compensated equity to owners. 6 weeks later, I bought Margaret's house, watched movers haul away her history, and handed Dorothy a rose cutting smiling. Neighbors emerged like survivors after storm, bird feeders bloomed, chalk brightened driveways, and laughter finally sounded normal again in Willowbrook. I announced a community resource center inside her old fortress, legal clinics, transparency workshops, and a library for homeowners everywhere. The Attorney General called. Elena grinned. Expand the division, they said. I asked to work remote between roses and reforms. At dusk, I told my father's photo we got them, and the garden answered with quiet, stubborn blooming at last. A text pinged from Colorado's Patricia Williams, reforms adopted, garden named for my father, and applause for buying villain's house. Dorothy's advice proved true. The best revenge is a life well lived, especially when it uplifts every neighbor you touch. Somewhere behind bars, Margaret faced rules she could not bend, while Willowbrook finally breathed like a community again at peace.